When Karen forged documents claiming ownership of my house and accused me of fraud, she thought she'd cornered me. Her smug confidence was almost impressive until I uncovered her dirty little secret. Hidden behind the pristine hedges of her backyard was an illegal sewing factory, buzzing with activity and completely off the books. Karen had no idea that her attempt to frame me would unravel her entire operation. She wanted to ruin my life, but she didn't realize she'd handed me the thread to unravel hers. Karen's smugness was palpable as she waved the forged documents in front of the gathered HOA members, her voice dripping with faux authority. "It's all here," she declared, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Proof that David has been fraudulently claiming ownership of his property. This house doesn't even belong to him." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Karen's grin widened, feeding off their shock. I stepped forward, calm but with a fire burning in my chest. "Karen," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs, "you've made a grave mistake." Her smile faltered for a split second before she recovered. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You can't talk your way out of this one. The documents don't lie." "No," I replied, pulling out a folder from my briefcase. "But you do." The room fell silent as I laid out the evidence. Photos, receipts, and city permits all proving the documents she held were forgeries. But I wasn't done. "And while you were busy framing me," I continued, my voice rising, "you forgot to cover your own tracks." I held up another set of papers. "These show the illegal sewing factory you've been running in your backyard. Unregistered workers, unpaid taxes, and zoning violations. Shall I go on?" Karen's face turned ashen, her bravado crumbling. You can't prove that," she stammered, her voice shaking. "Oh, but I can," I said, stepping closer, "and I already have. The authorities are on their way." The crowd erupted in whispers, their disbelief turning into outrage. Karen's carefully constructed facade was collapsing, and for the first time, she looked truly afraid. "You thought you could destroy me," I said, my voice steady and cold. "But all you've done is expose yourself. This is the end of your reign, Karen." The sound of sirens in the distance sealed her fate. Her empire of lies had finally come crashing down. "Drop your city below. We want to see how far this story has reached." Karen had turned my quiet neighborhood into her personal battleground, and I was her favorite target. Violation notices littered my coffee table, each more absurd than the last. My flower beds weren't approved. My wind chimes were a safety hazard. Even the fence that had stood proudly for decades was suddenly labeled an eyesore. But Karen didn't stop there. She wielded her influence like a weapon, turning neighbors against me with whispered lies and manufactured complaints. Slowly, the waves and smiles disappeared. Long-standing friendships dissolved. I became a stranger in the community I'd been part of for years. As I watched Karen gather with her loyal followers near my fence, laughing and gesturing toward my home, I clenched my fists. This wasn't about property, it was about control. And Karen had no idea that her relentless smear campaign was about to backfire spectacularly. She might think she ruled the neighborhood, but she didn't know the truth. I wasn't just another homeowner. I was the wrong person to mess with. And Karen was about to learn that the hard way. It started when I opened the door. "Karen," I said, my tone calm but firm, "what brings you here today?" She didn't waste a second. "David," she began, her voice dripping with condescension, "I'm here to address a very serious matter, one that could have significant legal consequences for you." I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms. "Is that so?" Karen thrust the manila folder toward me, her nails tapping against the cover. "These," she declared, "are documents proving that your ownership of this property is fraudulent. You've been living here under false pretenses, and as HOA president, it's my duty to take action." I took the folder, flipping it open to reveal a stack of papers. At first glance, they looked official deeds, signatures, even a notary stamp. But as I scanned the contents, the inconsistencies jumped out at me. The dates didn't align, the signatures were suspiciously uniform, and the notary stamp? A forgery so blatant it was almost laughable. I looked up at Karen, who was watching me with a triumphant gleam in her eyes. "Karen," I said slowly, "these documents are fake." Her smile didn't falter. "Oh, I don't think so," she replied, her tone saccharine. "And I've already contacted my lawyer. If you don't vacate this property within 30 days, We'll be taking you to court." I couldn't help but laugh, the sound sharp and unexpected. "Karen," I said, shaking my head, "do you really think this is going to work? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Her smile wavered for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "I'm dealing with someone who's been breaking the law," she snapped, doubling down. "And I have every intention of making sure justice is served." I stepped closer, holding the folder out to her. "You've made a mistake, Karen," I said, my voice low and steady. "A big one. These forgeries won't hold up in court, and when this is over, you're going to regret ever stepping foot on my property." She snatched the folder back, her cheeks flushing with anger. "We'll see about that," she hissed, turning on her heel and marching back down the driveway. As I watched her retreat, I couldn't help but smile. Karen thought she had the upper hand, but she had no idea what was coming. She didn't know about the evidence I'd been gathering, or the illegal sewing factory hidden in her backyard that I was about to expose. Karen had declared war, but she was about to learn that she'd picked the wrong opponent. And this time, her threats wouldn't be enough to save her. Karen's smear campaign was working. As HOA president, she had a veneer of authority that made people trust her words, even when those words were baseless accusations. The idea that my house, my home, was somehow a detriment to the community was infuriating. My fence wasn't an eyesore. My lawn was well maintained. My flower beds were beautiful, despite Karen's claims they were unapproved. But Karen wasn't interested in the truth. She was interested in control, and the more isolated I became, the easier it was for her to maintain that control. One evening, as I watered the plants in my garden, I noticed Karen walking with two neighbors I'd known for years. The group stopped just a few feet away from my fence, talking in hushed tones. Every so often, Karen would gesture toward my house, and the neighbors would nod along, glancing at my yard with disapproval. I set the hose down and approached the group, my frustration bubbling over. "Karen," I called out, forcing a smile. "Everything all right?" Karen turned, her fake smile already in place. "David, we were just discussing community improvements, nothing to worry about." I looked at the neighbors, who avoided my gaze entirely. "Well, it seemed like you were discussing my property." Karen laughed lightly, shaking her head. "Oh no, not directly. But you know how it is, everyone wants to ensure the neighborhood maintains its charm. Some properties need a little extra care to meet those standards." Her words felt like daggers, and the way the neighbors nodded along only made it worse. Karen didn't have to say my name. She didn't have to point to my house. She'd already planted the idea in their minds. Later that night, I sat in my living room, staring at the stack of violation notices on my coffee table. The weight of Karen's lies hung heavy in the air. She wasn't just making my life difficult, she was systematically destroying my reputation, turning me into a pariah in the community I'd been part of for years. Emily was sitting across from me, scrolling through her phone. "You should hear what she's saying now," she muttered, her tone dripping with annoyance. "What now?" I asked, exhausted. "She told the bakers that your lawn ornaments are a safety hazard. A safety hazard. As if that tiny ceramic turtle is going to trip someone and send them to the hospital." I laughed bitterly. "That turtle was made by my daughter in art class. It's not hurting anyone." Emily shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Karen's not interested in the truth. She's interested in turning everyone against you." I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. "It's working, isn't it? The Johnsons barely look at me anymore. The Garcias act like I don't exist. She's poisoned the entire neighborhood." Emily's expression softened. "You can't let her win, David. She's just one person. She's only powerful because people let her be." I wanted to believe her, but it was hard to stay hopeful. Karen's influence was everywhere, and her lies were spreading faster than I could counter them. Karen wasn't the kind of person who stopped at being a nuisance. She wasn't satisfied with targeting my property, sending fines, or making absurd accusations. No, Karen's favorite weapon wasn't paperwork, it was people. And she wielded her influence like a scalpel, cutting through relationships, eroding trust, and isolating her targets. At first, it was subtle. The friendly interactions I'd grown used to, the waves and smiles from neighbors as I walked by, started to dwindle. The Johnsons, who lived 2 houses down, had always been warm and welcoming. Every holiday season, they'd drop by with plates of homemade pies, sharing stories about their grandchildren. But after Karen's rise to HOA president, something changed. I'd wave as I passed their house, only to be met with distracted nods or quick glances away. Then there were the Garcias. Their kids played soccer with mine every summer, and our families had spent countless weekends together at block parties and barbecues. But suddenly, the invitations stopped coming. At first, I thought it was just a busy schedule, but the avoidance was too consistent to be coincidental. The silence spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. The Petersons, who used to chat with me about gardening tips, started crossing the street to avoid passing my house. The Millers, who would often borrow tools and share theirs in return, acted as though they didn't know me anymore. The moment Karen stormed off my property with her forged documents clutched tightly in her hands, I knew I had to act quickly. I couldn't afford to wait for her threats to escalate further. The forged documents weren't just a minor inconvenience, they were a direct attack on my home, my history, and my rights. Over the next several days, I became a man on a mission. I spent hours combing through old files, pulling out everything from my grandmother's original deed to the property tax payments I'd made over the years. Every yellowed document, every faded photograph of the house became a piece of the puzzle I was determined to assemble. I drove to the county records office the following morning, my hands clutching a list of documents I needed to verify. The clerk, a kind older woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, raised an eyebrow as I explained the situation. "Forged documents, huh?" she said, her voice low as she leaned in. "Sounds like someone's playing with fire." "You have no idea," I muttered, sliding my ID across the counter. "Can you help me pull the original deed records for my property? I need proof that my ownership predates anything Karen Thompson claims." The clerk nodded, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Minutes later, she handed me a thick stack of papers. "These should do it," she said, her expression softening. "Good luck. Sounds like you're dealing with quite the character." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "You don't know the half of it." As the evidence piled up, so did my resolve. I found emails from the original sale of the property, photographs documenting the restoration of the house over the years, and even old neighborhood newsletters featuring my grandmother's beloved Victorian rose garden. Each piece of paper, each photograph became a weapon in my arsenal. "That's it," I said, a grin spreading across my face for the first time in days. "That's the crack we needed." But I wasn't done yet. Karen had been careful, but not careful enough. Through my private investigator, I uncovered something even more damning: emails between Karen and her so-called lawyer. The emails detailed the plan to intimidate me into leaving, complete with instructions on how to create the forged documents. "You're dealing with a grade, a scammer," the investigator told me, his voice dry but impressed. "She's bold, I'll give her that. But she's also sloppy. These emails will bury her." By the end of the week, I had everything I needed: original deeds, tax records, notarization logs, photographs, and, most importantly, evidence of Karen's fraud. Every piece of the puzzle was in place, and the picture it painted was damning. Karen thought she had me cornered, but she didn't realize I was laying a trap of my own. Her lies were about to unravel, and when they did, she wouldn't just lose her false claim to my house, she'd lose the reputation she'd worked so hard to build. I sat back at the dining room table, surrounded by stacks of evidence, and felt a sense of calm wash over me. Karen might have started this war, but I was going to finish it. And when the time came, I would make sure she understood exactly who she was messing with. As I sifted through the mountain of evidence proving the ownership of my home and dismantling Karen's forged claims, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. Something deeper, more sinister. Her desperation and blatant attempts to intimidate me suggested she was protecting something far bigger than an HOA dispute or a forged document. That's when I noticed the unusually high utility bills tied to Karen's property, hidden within the financial records my investigator had dug up. For a suburban backyard, the numbers didn't add up. The bills weren't indicative of a typical household, they hinted at industrial usage. From my vantage point across the street, Karen's backyard had always been suspiciously off-limits, hidden behind towering hedges. On quiet nights, faint lights flickered from the hidden area, accompanied by the unmistakable hum of machinery. It wasn't the sound of pool pumps or sprinklers it was manufacturing. Armed with new suspicions, I reached out to my private investigator and requested footage of Karen's backyard. Within days, he returned with videos showing workers slipping in and out of her property at odd hours, carrying stacks of fabric and loading boxes into unmarked vans. Through the hedges, sewing machines were visible inside a makeshift structure, with piles of fabric stacked high against the walls. This wasn't just a violation of zoning laws, it was an illegal sewing operation. I confronted one of Karen's former landscapers, a man she'd fired after he refused to join her HOA. He was hesitant at first, but eventually opened up. "She's been running that operation for years," he confessed, his voice low as we sat in a quiet diner. "Always tells people it's her private business and to keep their mouths shut. Pays workers under the table. It's not right." "Have you seen it yourself?" I pressed. He nodded. "Once. She made me move some equipment for her. Told me not to ask any questions." With the pieces falling into place, I pulled zoning records for Karen's property and confirmed what I suspected: there were no permits for any kind of manufacturing activity. Her sweatshop was completely off the books, shielded by her HOA presidency and reputation as a community leader. But I needed more. I tracked down one of Karen's former workers, a young woman who had recently left her operation. Her story confirmed everything. "She made us work long hours for almost no pay," the woman said, her hands trembling. "We weren't allowed to talk to anyone about it. She said if we did, we'd lose everything." The fear in her voice only strengthened my resolve. With video footage, financial records, and witness testimonies in hand, I filed a formal complaint with the city and alerted the labor board. The response was swift. Inspectors arrived at Karen's property within days, and what they found was damning. Karen's backyard sweatshop was exposed for what it was: an illegal operation violating labor laws, zoning regulations, and basic human rights. As inspectors dismantled the makeshift factory, Karen stood in her driveway, her usual smugness replaced by panic. "You can't do this," she shouted, her voice cracking as she waved her clipboard. "This is my property." One of the inspectors turned to her, holding up a zoning violation report. "Not anymore, Mrs. Thompson. You've broken every rule in the book." Karen thought her lies and intimidation tactics would shield her, but she hadn't counted on someone fighting back. Her illegal operation wasn't just her downfall, it was the end of her empire. And as the workers left her property, finally free from her grasp, I knew that justice had been served. Karen's reign was over. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to deliver the final ruling. Karen sat at the defense table, her once impeccable composure now replaced by visible strain. Gone was the smugness she'd carried for months, replaced by a nervous energy that seemed to crack her carefully crafted mask. Her lawyer whispered furiously in her ear, but Karen waved him off, her glare fixed squarely on me. I stood calmly at the plaintiff's table, the weight of months of evidence on my side. Witness testimonies, financial records, surveillance footage, it was all laid bare, painting an undeniable picture of Karen's corruption and criminal behavior. The courtroom's tension was palpable, every person holding their breath as the judge began to speak. "And based on the overwhelming evidence," the judge declared, pausing to let the gravity of the moment sink in, "this court finds Mrs. Karen Thompson guilty of fraud, harassment, and multiple zoning and labor violations." Karen gasped audibly, her face twisting with disbelief as whispers spread through the courtroom. "As punishment," the judge continued, his voice steady, "Mrs. Thompson is hereby sentenced to 400 hours of community service, focused on assisting underprivileged neighborhoods with housing improvements. Additionally, her property at 56 Oak Lane is to be seized and liquidated to repay damages to the victims of her illegal activities." The murmurs erupted into a buzz of outrage and relief. Karen shot up from her seat, her voice shrill as she pointed accusingly at everyone in sight. "This is a conspiracy," she screeched. "They're all against me. None of this is true." The judge banged his gavel firmly. "Mrs. Thompson, sit down or I'll hold you in contempt of court." Karen sank into her chair, fuming, but her protests were drowned out by the sound of the bailiff approaching to escort her out. Her reign of terror had come to an end, and it wasn't a moment too soon.